Okay, so men, they. Just remember that one, okay? This is Attic Greek, and I'm going to go very literal for now. The NIV did not do it. Not only welcome our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm. All right, so at least they get like a little this slight differentiation between the first thing they list. On the one hand, he welcomed our appeal. On the other hand, he's coming with you with much enthusiasm. Okay, I'm going to go very literal just so you can see how it works. So on the one hand, edexato, aorist, active, indicative of dekomai. We've seen this word here, to receive, to welcome. We've seen a cognitive that to use prodectos here. Dectos means welcomed or received, acceptable. Here it is to accept an urgency or accept an insistence or an appeal or a request. Here he is receiving something. Thein paraklesin, a request. It is an appeal, it is an exhortation, it is an insistence. And so here we're going to say request because there's a contrast here. They requested him, but on the other hand, he had his own initiative to go himself. He was already wanting to go. And so the aorist tense of this word here, aorist, what do we have? Okay. So the aorist of edexato is a conjunctive aorist regarding into one collecting in one entirety, him receiving the request and seeing the passage. It was not much. It did not take much of a request. They probably only told him once, go. And that was it. That was all that was needed. So it becomes very punctiliar. The active voice. This is a deponent verb, which is passive in form but active in meaning. So he produced the action of the verb of saying, yes, I'll take it. And the indicative mood is declarative. So, on the one hand, accepted, thein paraklesin, the request. And this article here points to the request of Paul, so we're going to translate it possessive, our request. So that, on the one hand, he accepted our request, and then they, post-positive they. On the other hand, men, they. On the one hand, on the other hand. Remember, these are post-positive, meaning that there's a word that begins right before that. Post-positive was a way to let you know that a new sentence begins or a new clause. And even though this was not the first word as we would have it in English, this revealed to the person that this next word belongs to the next clause. So don't let the post-positive characteristic confuse you. It was very clear to the Greeks. It's become very clear to me. Okay, so they, on the other hand, spudaioteros. Now this is a comparative of the same word that we've seen. Spudein, spudazzo. All these words of diligence. Remember, diligence is not just eagerness or readiness, as we've seen many translations, or haste. It has to do with assiduity. It has to do with the motivation of Bible doctrine inside of your soul, producing either a commitment towards a pastor teacher or a concern for your congregation. So, spudaioteros. Spudaios is the adjective, is the adjective of spude. Spude is the noun, the characteristic. Spudaios means diligent. And then this here, the suffix oteros, is comparative, more diligent. So we're going to translate it more diligent here, but you know that it has to do with concern, motivation towards his congregation, the Corinthians. On the other hand, more diligent. And we have this participle here of huparko, which is often used interchangeably with Amy, being more diligent. But the difference between Amy and huparkos, at least here, is that this becomes more intense. More intense. And so, it describes a state of character already existing in Titus, from the doctrine inside of his soul, this was his character of being more diligent. And as we see that God put this in his heart, so just mix it all together. Titus being a person that was very, I'm going to finish this, I'm going to put them in their place, and all these things, and add the fact that he cares for the Corinthians, has a concern for them. So the equation is that he's more diligent. Huparkon. This is an intense participle. We're going to translate it in the English, being more diligent, even though the English does not get it. If I could come up with a better translation than this, I'll do it, but many times the English does not catch everything that the Greek is expressing. On the other hand, being more diligent, existing in a state of more diligence, now that's a little bit too much. Okay, so yes, it's a predicate nominative because it's huparkon. It is a copulative verb. Huparko, existing, to be. And so is a present, it's a durative present for something that began in the past. In Titus, as he learned Bible doctrine, he was always spudein, just this character of being motivated by the word of God. The active voice, Titus produces the action of the verb of producing this from Bible doctrine inside of his soul. And the participle here is, and the participle is circumstantial, it's temporal. So we translate it, being more diligent. Okay, so remember, this is part of his character, more diligent. And what I mean by character has to do with the principles, the standards inside of your soul, the motivation in your soul. In contrast to the Hispanic culture that we say, oh, you have a very strong character. Tienes un carácter muy fuerte. What we mean by that is temperament. And temperament and character are not the same thing. What we usually refer in the Hispanic culture by tienes un carácter muy fuerte. You have a very strong character. Normally means you have a very weak character. For if you get hot-headed all the time, if you're impulsive, what we call carácter fuerte, you have a weak character. You have no control over your own impulses, your emotions. You have no standards, no personal sense of destiny. So, character, I would really expect for us in the Hispanic culture to finally correct that meaning of that word, carácter. It's not temperament. Okay, so now we have this next word that we saw in verse 3 of this chapter, autairetos, which means self-chosen, out of one's own free will, out of his own volition. I like to translate it to be consistent with our terminology. Autairetos, and this is also a nominative case. So we're going to do that, out of his own volition. So now you see the contrast why he uses men and they on the one hand, on the other. It seems like he's contrasting. What is he contrasting? The request, accepting the request. On the other hand, out of his own volition, he would have done it. Yes, on the one hand, he accepted the request and he took it, but on the other hand, he would have done it without a request. The request was not necessary. This is why he uses men and they. All right. So, autairetos, out of his own volition. And so now hoti, I can go back and say that this is causal, it takes place. For, on the one hand, he accepted our request. On the other hand, being more diligent, out of his own volition, and now we have the main verb, exeilten. This nominative case functions as an adverb expressing the manner or the mental attitude or the way he produces the action of the verb. This is an odd nominative case. Did I write it down as to what the name of this is? I did not write it down. If I remember tomorrow, I'll go ahead and write it down. So, yes. This nominative produces the action of the main verb, but it describes the manner in which he produces the action. So now we have ex erchomai, we've seen etiquomai many times. It means to go, to come. But ex, that prepositional phrase, it's out, to go out, went out. And so, aorist active indicative, the aorist tense is a constitutive aorist. He just went out. On the one hand, he accepted the request. On the other hand, out of his own volition, just went out. Went out. The active voice, Titus produces the action of the verb, and the indicative mood is declarative. He took the initiative, in other words. That's what the NIV tried to do. Not only welcome our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm on his own initiative. I like that, but I wanted you to see the Greek. Okay. And then pros plus the accusative of direction, face to face with y'all, to y'all. So went out to you, to y'all. And now we have a translation. I'll need to correct that hoti in my notes because my jackass did not write it down. So now it says verse 17. Let's begin with verse 16. But thanks be to God who gave the same diligent concern on behalf of you in the heart of Titus. For on the one hand, he accepted our request. On the other hand, being more diligent, out of his own volition, went to y'all, went out to y'all. Okay, the contrast here between, or the difference here between the on the one hand and on the other hand has to do with him accepting a request and him out of his own volition wanting to go. Okay, verse 18, we are going to be able to start talking about Luke. And it says in verse 18 in the NIV, and we are sending along with him the brother, who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. Okay, now we can start talking about Luke. So, verse 18. This post-positive there, we're going to translate and. So why does it use there right here? Almost like if it's a mild contrast, because Titus is not just going alone, he's going to go with his brother, Don Adelphon. The reason why I mentioned that it's his brother, because it does not just mention Adelphos as Paul mentions it without the article. It mentions it here, the article, identifying a specific brother. The brother, his brother. Titus was a Gentile, a Greek. Luke was a Gentile, a Greek. Luke was with them the whole time. Well, not the whole time. He joined them in the third missionary journey of Paul and ended up with Paul all the way to his death. This is the brother that was praised by all churches. But before I start talking about him, let's begin with our exegesis. And so sunepem samen. This is the aorist active indicative of sum pempo. So it's a compound word. It's sum plus pempo. Sum means with. Pempo means to send. Sum pempamen. This is a constitutive aorist regarding one entirety, then sending Luke with him. And the active voice, Paul and his team produced the action of the verb, respecting thee. Okay, there was a delegation. The people voted whether Luke should be the one that accompanies Titus. They needed 2 men of trust, so as to avoid any criticism, so as to avoid any discrediting of the ministry, because this was a large amount of money. The Macedonians, even though they went through poverty, they became, pretty affluent, and they gave a lot of that money. Now the Corinthians, who are affluent, are also going to donate a lot of money, and they're going to give sacrificially, applying the doctrine of kenosis. So this is going to be a heavy amount of money, and they must avoid any criticism, any possibility of them mishandling this money. So the 2 men of confidence here are Titus and the brother, which is going to be mentioned as him, whose praise in the gospel is throughout all the churches. Everyone knows Luke. Everyone knows his work for the gospel. He was the one who wrote the Gospel of Luke, and he was the one who wrote the Acts, the book of Acts of the Apostles. He was a doctor, he was a historian, he was very intelligent. It's probably the reason why also God kept him with Paul all the way to his death, so that Paul can have a companion who had someone who had the level of intelligence as Paul had. Not just so that he can have his own personal doctor, but someone to have a conversation with him on the same level of intelligence as he. Well, I'll keep going ahead because I just want to talk about Luke, I guess. But sune bemsamen. And how do we translate this? And we sent, because it's the first person plural, and we sent him. We sent with. And then meta plus the genitive of accompaniment of autos, with him, and we sent with him, meta plus auto. Have you seen all the different ways we've used meta? Well, finally we see meta with genitive here is translated with him.